you so much for joining us today during some of your lunch hours and some of your afternoons. Ron and his wife, Kathy Shapiro, have been, for me, household names for as long as I can remember. I've read all of his books and had the privilege of attending Ron's workshops in the States. I've heard countless stories that, among other things, under his belt, he is a captivating storyteller, as you'll see. The reason that Ron is here today is because the INE team and our Incubate North partners, Josh and Andy from Outfront, work daily with the mindset that it takes a village to start a scale up, to scale a startup. When innovators and entrepreneurs have problems on our team or questions that we can't answer, we scour our Rolodexes to connect them with wisdom outside of ourselves to help them advance their work. Thanks to the investments from TD Bank's Ready Commitment and our core funders, CanNor, into the Incubate North program, UConn's very first business incubator, we're tapping into our extensive networks to offer you, our valued program participants and VIPs, unparalleled access to thought leaders across North America. These leaders include Vicki Saunders, CEO of SheEO, Tosh Southwick, co-founder of IRP Consulting, Mike Nielsen, entrepreneur in residence at Intel, Wes Moore, candidate for governor of Maryland, and arguably in Ron and my family and many of those of you that met Wes a few weeks ago, a future president of the United States of America, and also one of Ron's friends.
I'm not sure that's a good thing, by the way, but keep going. We'll talk about
It's
being
true.
future president of America.
It might not be that great of a job anymore. Ron himself is a prominent American attorney, sports agent, author, negotiator, educator, speaker, and civic leader, and most preciously, an amazing friend. So Ron and our team would like this session to be super interactive and casual, as you can hopefully tell by Ron's demeanor. I have 6 questions lined up to tap into some of the greatest wisdom that I've learned from Ron, but please, we'll be keeping a track of the chat and come off of mute as well if you have anything you'd like to ask. Ron is more than inviting for us to make it happen that way. So I hope that you all have had the opportunity and the invitation that we sent out, or that I sent out, to watch the video introducing Ron, because I didn't want to take too much more time than just this to share with you kind of his background. So his whole background is in there, and I hope you've got to see that and how awesome he is. So let's dive maybe into Ron's stories now. What's up, Ron? Even though we've said hi already.
So one of the difficulties, Lauren, in terms of being introduced by you, is that you make the introduction so beyond anything that I've accomplished that it's hard to follow the introduction. So I'll say that to start. But what's up is it's good to be with you all. As I said to some of you who were on earlier with me, my dog Rutherford is at my side. You may hear a bark or two during the presentation, but he's joined me in the pandemic and has been with me ever since. And I don't know how to separate from him. But the bottom line is it is good to be with you. I have a connection with Canada, but the other side of the country, I see Ryan from TD. Am I correct, Ryan? You are from TD? And I think of a negotiation that I was involved in on behalf of the Toronto Blue Jays with TD. And we finished, and this is the way you ought to finish all negotiations. We finished the negotiations, and I ended up with a coat, and the coat was a Canada Goose coat, the warmest coat I will ever own. I never heard of Canada Goose, by the way. And inside that coat is the Toronto Blue Jays logo and TD's logo. So I carry a bit of Canada with me on the coldest days of winter down here. But go ahead, Lauren, let's get to the program.
That's great. I love it. So Ron, let's jump into questions. And again, folks, chime into the details and anything else if you've researched Ron that you'd like to know, and we'll try to get those answered to within this hour, a little less than hour that we have. Ron, I've told everybody that you are one of the nicest people in the entire world. You've even written this book called The Power of Nice, which we have purchased for all of our Incubate North businesses as a gift from us to them in honor of you. And folks, this man so naturally does business with heart and has built an incredibly successful career with the heart being at the foundation of everything that he does. So Ron, you're an active advisor to a wide range of corporate, political, sports, and nonprofit leaders, and has been quoted as one of the most powerful people in sports and one of the most respected attorneys. And with all of the choices that famous athletes have, even though for agents, even though you have been, others have been more qualified than you, they've chosen you. Can you tell us about this concept of being nice and powerful and why it's so impactful?
Well, I don't know where to start, but let me start with this. You know, I called the book The Power of Nice, and the rest of the title, by the way, is How to Negotiate So Everyone Wins, especially you. And you all in a program like the program you're in, it's very important that you negotiate effectively and you negotiate well and you accomplish your objectives. What the Power of Nice builds into it is an understanding that it is very important that you help the other side accomplish their objectives. Now, you know, you've heard the term win-win used loosely. You know, we both got to win, even Steven. That's not really what it's all about. It's about win-win is not wimp-wimp. Win-win is about maximizing and achieving your objectives. But as you do it, being mindful that the other party has objectives, because you want to reach an agreement and then you want to achieve a relationship in the end that allows you to work out problems if they arise in the agreement, or allows you to do further agreements. So that in overview is the mindset of the Power of Nice. In order to get what you want, help them get what they want. But I want you all to notice, and despite Lauren's suggestion that I'm the nicest guy, it depends on who you talk to, right? The title of the book is not Be Nice. The title of the book is The Power of Nice, and if I were to rewrite the title, it would be Empower Yourself so that in dealing with other people, you can be nice and achieve your goals. Because it's about empowerment. And I wouldn't have just written a book about being nice. There are plenty of Be Nice books and plenty of Be Nice philosophers, although I believe that it's very important. But I wrote a book that was built on and this is the key, a systematic approach to dealing with other people, a systematic approach to negotiating, systematic approach, which means if you can embrace this systematic approach and it's not complex, you're not going to feel overly defensive if you feel like they have all the strength in a negotiation, or you're not going to feel so tough and strong that you've got to beat them up in the old win-lose sense of negotiation. By the way, Rutherford's making noises in the background. He's got a big bone and he's dropping it. Raise your hand if I have to put Rutherford out, okay? I thought he was going to sleep through this because I know he gets bored when I talk. But if you have a problem, Lauren, let me know. So we've got two things here. We've got the element of recognizing what the other party wants, so that you don't have to be overly aggressive or over defensive with them. But most of all, empowering yourself with a systematic approach. Now, I'll let you all ask questions and break it down, but the systematic approach is pretty simple. It's called the 3 Ps: prepare, and there's a device to prepare that's somewhat systematic. Probe, that's asking questions and listening. And propose, knowing how to propose. And we can break that down, but I don't want to be a monologue today. So let's start out with 2 things: a mindset, in order to get what you want in life, help others get some of what they want. A system, the 3 Ps: prepare, probe, and propose, which empowers you not to be overly defensive or overly aggressive, which equals a lasting relationship. Because when you get to be an old guy like me and you look back on your life, there is nothing more important than the relationships you build with others. And most of my relationships, most of my businesses have been built on the relationship with so-called adversaries, people who were on the other side of the table, who asked me to come in their world as a negotiator or an advisor. And it's been a very, very satisfying path. I'll stop there. Do you want to jump in with questions, or do you want me to continue, or anyone want to break it down a little bit? And feel free to jump in. I did want to have a dialogue today.
I'm going to get Heather to help me monitor kind of questions to Ron. I remember a story that you told about a gentleman who you went to see, and it was, I don't remember the context of the story, except that this was a really big deal. Like, this first meeting was a really big deal, and you were waiting in his waiting room, or the area, whatever it was, with wherever he was, and he had pictures of roses all around the building, all around the room. I don't remember that. And essentially, Ron, do you want to get into that real quick, and the power?
I absolutely will. And again, it's not part of the 3 Ps, but it's part of the aura of building relationships. I had to negotiate with the general manager of the Kansas City Royals baseball team here in the States. His name was Herc Robinson. And Herc and I didn't have much of a relationship. He was always sort of a distant and detached guy, but I had a pretty important negotiation coming up with him. And one thing I tell people is, part of your preparation, do whatever you can to learn about the person on the other side of the table that you're negotiating with. Their personality, their interest, very importantly, their past negotiations, their style of negotiations, things like that. And I couldn't find a lot on Herc, because he was one of those rare birds who had come to the top of the organization through being the guy who took care of the field and the buildings, and he was an operations guy. He wasn't a baseball guy. And so I really couldn't find very much on him. But when I got to his office and walked in his office, I noticed that on the wall, there was the usual family wall, there were the sports stars wall, and then there was the flower wall. And the flower wall had pictures of roses. And I looked and I said, my heavens, there's a double delight, one of my favorite roses. And I said to Herc, you got roses over there. Do you grow roses? What's the connection? And he said, well, I grow roses. And I said, how about the double delight? I mean, to me, I love the multicolor, the deep red and the white. And he lit up. And for the next 10 minutes, we talked about fertilizer, sprays, seasons, and roses. And we developed a bond, a connection that helped the discussion that followed, the negotiation that followed, go more easily. And so that is the story of bonding to create a relationship. But there are all kinds of other situations where you may find or feel that the person you're dealing with is non-bondable. You can't find the connection. They don't grow roses. They don't read the books you read. In fact, they're very antagonistic about you. And you have to, again, develop a mindset. When we talk about prepare, probe, and propose, prepare, and there's a checklist for preparation, which I'm happy to send you all and we can talk about if you want me to break it down, is about the person, as I said, and how he or she has dealt in the past. But when you get in and probe, it's also about asking questions and listening. And one of the truly great ways to bond, one of the truly great ways to connect with people is to ask questions. And probing is so important because it lets people feel that the negotiation isn't just about what you want and your needs, but you're interested in what they want and their needs. How do you feel about someone who's interested in you versus someone who seems to be disinterested? How do you feel about someone who you feel is really listening to you, which is part of probing, rather than someone who is not listening to you? So there are different ways to connect with people, but connection is so important regardless of what the situation or challenge may be. Other questions?
Thanks.
Yes, go ahead. It says David, but you don't look like David. Okay, yes. Says David under you. No, I see it. David is the person under you on my computer. What is your name? I don't hear you. Unmute.
Did you set it up?
Oh, Val, we don't have you.
Is it Val?
Yeah.
Val, we don't have your audio. Is your audio on, or can you look below and see if you can connect your audio? Okay, you're unmuted.
I took my headphones.
You
Can
got
you hear
it.
me now?
Yeah.
I hear you.
Oh,
Go ahead.
how do you know
I got
that?
it.
Okay, very cool. Thanks, Ron. I'm sorry about that. I didn't realize. As you were talking, and thanks for sharing, I absolutely agree with you. I'm a coach on the side, and questions are my best friend because you can really figure things out when you ask great questions. Curiosity is everything. I'd love for you to give us some examples of when you're in a meeting, and I'm sure it's happened to you lots of times, where someone's already have preconceived notions about where they want to go, what they think is the situation, and they can't get past it. In fact, even when you're probing, they've already had their mindset. So maybe some examples of how do you, through questions or through types of questions, that you can really kind of
Valerie, there is a methodology to questioning that I use, and I'll try to simplify it for purposes of this brief discussion. But when I probe, I use what I call the tool of what, WHAT. Now, what do I mean? Okay. They have a preconceived notion. They have a preconceived position. And if they hold to that position, I'm not going to be able to settle or resolve the differences that exist. So, and by the way, as I go through what, it's not linear. You can jump around, but I'm going to start with W and then go H and A and T. I'll start with questions like when they say, well, we just can't do anything other than what we said. And I will start with the what makes you say that? What do you mean by that? Can you explain? And then they'll say, well, we've just never been able to do anything like this before. And I'll say, well, what have you done before? So I'm trying to open it up by taking the barrier that they've given me and ask questions. Then they say, and this probably faces all of you one time or another, well, we just don't have it in the budget. Then I go to H and I'll say, hypothetically speaking, if you had it in the budget, could you see yourself doing something like this? Or, and again, it doesn't have to be H, you could say, assuming you had it in the budget. And they could say yes or no, right? If they say no, then I'll say, why not? If they say yes, shock, okay? If it's a budgetary thing, truly, then I'll say something like, have you ever had a situation where you didn't have it in the budget, but you were able to follow through on a particular project? Hypothetically speaking. And again, I'm going quickly, but Valerie, am I in the zone that you want me to be in terms of responding to your question? And then I go to A. And A is, if they should ask me a question, I may ask them another question. You know, what do you base that on? What does it mean? And I always use T because I used to have a television show of my own for a number of years, and I would interview all these high profile people from around the world. And I'll never forget, you know, I didn't want to forget and I didn't want to miss something. And at the end, I would use my T question. And again, not always asked this way, but, oh, this has really been interesting. is there anything else you can tell me, or tell me more? So, those are not stock questions, and I'm not suggesting that your mind doesn't have to operate. And when they say things, could you explain that? What do you mean by that? Have you ever had an experience like that? You have to listen well to be a good prober. And Valerie, I don't have to tell you as a coach how important listening is. And I want everyone on this call, if you leave with anything, I want you to understand that probably the most important tool for a negotiator or just dealing with people in life is learning to be an effective listener. And because when you listen, you will get the opportunity to ask more questions that will lead to more answers, that will lead to more questions, that may ultimately lead you to understand that people who, like the people that Valerie described, say, absolutely not, I'm not going to do that, what their interests are. And if you can get what their interests are rather than their I won't do it position, you may be able to uncover an answer to a problem. And if I may tell another story for just a second, I was leafing through, believe it or not, one of my old books today and reading about something that intrigues me today because of what's going on in the world. And that's the Camp David Accords. Now, you all may not know what that means, but in the late 1970s, something happened in the Middle East. Something happened in the Middle East that people thought could never happen, and we think can never happen today. Today, it's the Israelis and the Palestinians. Then it was the Israelis and the Egyptians. And to make a long, wonderful story short, the President of the United States, who was one of the least effective public speakers we've ever had in the presidency, who was not charismatic in any way, but who was a great listener and a great questioner, brought together the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of Egypt, Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin. And they had started some negotiations that had broken down. And he brought them over to the United States, put them up in a place we call Camp David, which is the presidential retreat in the United States, and really started asking a lot of questions and listening in a situation that looked hopeless. And it was all about a dispute about the Sinai Desert, which is a big stretch of land on the border of Gaza today, we know, and Israel and other countries in the Middle East, Egypt. And Egypt wanted the Sinai Desert, and Israel wanted the Sinai Desert. And Valerie, like the people you described a little bit earlier, intractable. They weren't giving it up. But Jimmy Carter was an unbelievable coach because, he started asking questions like, why do you want the Sinai Desert, Menachem Begin? And he talked about when the Israelis won it in prior wars, they won security. They had 15 minutes early warning on jet planes coming from Arab countries to drop bombs on Israel. It was security. When he talked to Anwar Sadat and asked him the why question, he found out that he wanted it because he was going to be assassinated if he didn't get it. And by the way, sadly, some years later, he was, because it was part of the heritage of the Egyptian people to have the Sinai Desert. The land was important. Now, you might say, well, okay, he finds that out. What's he do? Well, again, cutting through a long story, he ultimately came up with the idea, based on what he'd said, that he would have the United States provide security to Israel through early warning systems, through planes and other things. He would have the land go to Egypt, but it would be demilitarized and it couldn't be used for military purposes. And he achieved something that, and there were many other great instances of his asking questions and listening, because these guys were at the extremes of the opposition. And I'll never forget, I sat at I was peripherally involved because I represented United States Jewish interests at the White House. I would go there periodically. I was the head of the National Jewish Community Relations Council, which was a particular division of a group of community relations people in America. And the bottom line is I sat at the White House at a dinner when the peace was achieved. And I watched Israeli soldiers come in and sit at tables with Egyptian soldiers. Now that's like watching people from Gaza sit with people, Jewish people from Jerusalem. I mean, it's just as extreme. And the impossible happened because of Jimmy Carter. And I was sitting next to a man named Jim Rouse, who is truly one of the great servant businessmen I've ever known. And he had tears in his eyes. And he said, our president, he doesn't say much very well, but he listens so well. And look what he's accomplished here. And Jim was crying and I had a tear in my eye, but that's the power of listening and asking questions. Valerie, does that respond to your question?
It was beautiful. Yeah. Absolutely it did.
Okay, other questions?
I do
Hi,
have a
Jose.
question. Can you hear me well, or the speaker is kind of far?
No, I can hear you. It's Jose, is that your name?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay, Jose.
I was wondering, Ron, how do you deal? Do you have a systemic system? Do you have a system when you are meeting with people from different culture? You know, asking question is an art, and you know, sometimes I totally believe in questions, but sometimes I wonder what kind of questions and which one will be perceived offending or too personal or too direct, or like, what do you do when you're gonna go meet other cultures and you want to
Jose,
ask questions?
that's a wonderful question. And on this and by the way, it's called preparation checklist. And if
Yes.
Lauren reminds me, I'll email it to her and she can email it to you. But there's, you know, a block about the other side and knowing about who they are and what they are in the introductory part of it. And historically, where I would start when I was dealing in a multicultural setting was with the book, How to Negotiate Anything with Anyone, Anywhere in the World. There was a book on that. So if I was in China, I'd look up China, but I wouldn't rely solely on it. If I was in Holland, I'd look up Holland or the Netherlands. If I was in Germany, all Africa, I've done some dealings in Africa, and there are different customs and the like there, plus religious factors affect it. So I believe that you're very right. It's like the guy with roses on his wall. I have to find out what's in the fabric of the culture of the people I'm dealing with. This can mean good in the United States. This can mean go to hell somewhere else. And you don't want to be at a bargaining table and go like this, saying, oh, that's great. And they go, oh my God, what is he doing? So you have to be careful, both in terms of physically the way you do things. In China, you deal with middle managers. You don't deal with the CEO until a certain point. And you don't suggest that you deal with it. So you have to follow the cultural norms. Charlene Barshevsky, who is one of the world's great negotiators, she was the ambassador for trade. She was a cabinet member in the Bill Clinton administration. She was a good friend and is a good friend. And she wrote the introduction to my book, a foreword to my book. One of the forewords, The Power of Nice, How to Negotiate with so everyone wins, especially you. And she talks about dealing with the Chinese and dealing with the Japanese and making them feel like they're central and having patience. You know, in the United States, we like to get it done. There's a pace of negotiation in certain Arab countries. There's a pace of negotiation in certain Asian countries. And that pace is absolutely key in understanding it if you want to achieve a positive result. So Jose, you're right on. I do research. I wrote another book called Dare to Prepare, How to Win Before You Begin. They call me the preparation fanatic, okay? I can't, whether it be learning about someone in my own culture, but learning everything I can about him or her and how they act, or whether it be learning about a culture of someone that I'm dealing with in a foreign land and then learning about them, I just want to come in totally equipped. And I can't always, but I get as far as I can, and then I go to work. Does that respond? Okay, good. Watch it.
I know, I was very
You're good.
careful.
You're good. You're good. That was great. Other questions?
Ron, you've kind of skimmed through a couple of the questions already, which is exactly what we wanted to happen as far as kind of a natural progression. One of them was kind of how we deal with the power of nasty.
Stay with that, Lauren. Stay with that, Lauren, because I think we ought to break that down a little bit more.
Okay, great. Tell us, share with us the power of nasty, how you suggest people deal with that.
Well, actually, the book wasn't called The Power of Nasty. It was, people used to ask me at seminars, well, what happens if they're not nice? You know, and you're nice. And I said, please remember, my being nice is my being systematic, okay? I think you all got that point at this point. But there are nasty people out there. So I decided to write a book, How to Bullies, Tyrants, and Impossible People, How to Beat Them Without Joining Them. Do you notice that all my books have the longest titles in the world? Okay? You know, they all, I can never say it all in 5 words. But, and Bullies, Tyrants is about dealing with difficult people. And what I got onto through the power of nice was this systematic idea. So I went to the Department of Psychiatry at Johns Hopkins and talked to my good friend who was the chair of the department there and said, look, I want to create a methodology for dealing with difficult people. If I write out a thesis, and by the way, that's a highfalutin term. My brain doesn't necessarily write out theses, but an idea, will you look at it and tell me if you think it works? And so I said, wouldn't it be great if I could deliver a message to folks that empowered them to diffuse the difficult people in there, the power of nasty people, Lauren, as you say, in their lives. And I came up with another system. And you know what it was called? NICE, NICE. Now, let me be clear. I don't believe you give adults a list of 24 things to do to be a better negotiator or 10 steps to dealing with nasty people. So you'll see I keep things in 2s, 3s, and 4s, okay? Except for the preparation checklist, which has 8 items, but that's just a checklist for preparation. But let me give you an example of the concept of neutralizing, of the NICE system within Bullies, Tyrants. Neutralize your emotions. What do I mean? Well, I was just reading a book about Eliza Hamilton. She was Alexander Hamilton's wife. If you saw Hamilton, the show, she was very much featured in it as being very important in it. And in that book appears Thomas Jefferson. And he was a tough guy for her to deal with. She did not get along with him, nor did Alexander Hamilton, another of the founding fathers of the United States, get along with him. And Jefferson thought other people were always nasty. People thought he was nasty, despite the fact that he wrote the Declaration of Independence. But Jefferson did speak some words that are very relevant to this neutralize your emotions thing. He said, whenever I'm going to get angry, I count to 10. Whenever I'm going to get very angry, I count to 100. Now, that doesn't mean if you and your spouse or your significant other or your partner or your business partner or the person on the other side of the table or whoever you're dealing with provokes you, that you start counting out loud, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What Jefferson was saying is he, under his breath, is counting to get control of himself. And then I build on that the words, don't take it personally and don't get personal. Now, I'm not going to tell you that I don't fail at this and that you won't fail at this, because we're trying to impose on human beings a discipline that will not lead to absolute results, but it helps more often than not. So 2 steps. Number 1, recognize, use the count to say that you're in a difficult person situation. And 2, start with N, neutralize your emotions. I'm not going to do all of the and I, C, and E, but I'll go through them quickly in a second. Neutralize your emotions. Don't take it personally and don't get personal. I met with a group of kids in Israel. They were Palestinian and Jewish kids, Jewish Israelis and Palestinian Muslims. And they're in an organization that I work very closely with called Peace Players. And Lauren's brother was very involved in Peace Players in its early years. And we built this Middle East program. And every year we'd have a session where we'd sit around and they would ask me to talk to them about the books or other things. And I never forget, we went through dealing with difficult people. In their lives, they're constantly dealing with difficult people. They're going through the Palestinians particularly, but both sides. They're going through checkpoints. They're asking for their ID cards. All kinds of things happen that are very unsettling. And I will never forget one day when I was back in the States, our family would make an annual visit. We did it for 6 or 7 years to visit with the kids over there, and we watched them grow up. And one of them who grew up, who my wife Kathy and I became very attached to, helped her go to college. She recently got married. She wrote us and she said, I have to tell you a story. And she said, I practiced that end thing. I was going through a checkpoint, which is normally very tense and very long. And they ask you all kinds of questions. And I decided on this particular day, I saw this soldier up there. It happened to be a female staff sergeant or something, that I would do it differently. I would walk up and I'd smile and say, how are you today? And I'd give them my ID card before they said, give us your ID card. And, I just neutralized myself, and I didn't take it personally, and I didn't get personal. And I gave them my card. She looked at my card and she said, have a wonderful day. You look beautiful. And she marched through. Now, I'm not telling you that we're going to achieve peace between Palestinians and Israelis by having everybody present their cards and smile and, look nice or whatever. But she learned that in that moment anyway, neutralizing her emotions was very powerful. Think about it in the context of deals you've done. Think about it in the context of arguments you've had with friends or in your personal lives. If you could have pulled back and gone to where we talk, Valerie, with questions and asked questions and listened and neutralized so that you weren't taking it personally from the beginning, how much better off you would have been. I can think of many times how much better off I would have been had I practiced what I preached consistently. But again, we're human beings, we'll break down. But if you can systematize it, you're going to be that much more effective. The other elements, Lauren, of dealing with nasty people are identify why they are the way they are. And it's pretty simple. I'm not going to go into great detail now. They're either most of the time situationally difficult. Something's going on. They've lost their job. They're going to lose their job. They feel discriminated against. They've had some moment that has provoked them. Or they're strategically difficult. And I think is it John? Are you the lawyer? Is it John? Lawyers are deemed to be strategically difficult. I'm a lawyer, so I can say that, okay? But they use tactics and the like, and good cop, bad cop, games, all kinds of things to be strategically, or they're simply difficult. and simply difficult are authoritarian leaders. And I don't have to give you examples of them close to the border with Canada or throughout the world, but authoritarian business leaders, authoritarian sports team owners, authoritarian national leaders. So there are three kinds, and then you go to C, control the encounter, which is tied to which kind they are. And I'm not going to, this is not going to be a lecture, and E, end without escalating. But suffice it is to say that if you can just grasp a systematic approach, and as my friends at Hopkins said, if your mind can click into letting the systematic approach kind of take over, you have a better chance of avoiding a destructive clash with a nasty person than getting to a constructive result. Valerie.
I love what you said. I'm with you the whole way. And yeah, I really also like the empathetic view of the person, where they're at and why are they behaving like that. When you say to end, what the ending sometimes, when I guess my question is, when do you walk away? Is that strategic, and how do you gauge that?
I would say that as part of, when I say prepare, probe, and propose, it is not linear either. It can be prepare, probe, propose. In other words, you can move along. I'm getting a sign that my internet is unstable. Can you still hear me, folks? Are you okay? Good, okay. So the answer is, it's partially strategic and partially reactive. Strategic comes in the sense that you recognize that after you've done everything you can do, after you've really exercised all possibilities, that you're just not going to come up with a good result, one that you can embrace. In order to get what you want, you can't get what you want. Got it? So go ahead.
Is it a timing thing? So it could be at that moment, I can't get what I want.
It's a timing thing in two senses. One, as part of the preparation checklist, I have a timeline that I create. And if I'm falling outside my timeline, it was for a reason. I set the timeline because I had to get on to other deals, or because this deal not being done would interfere with other deals getting done, or whatever it was, number one. Number two, it could be more than timing. It could be recognition as I negotiate that not every deal is resolvable. And that leads to end without escalating, okay? I was dealing with a large pizza sauce company, tomato sauce company. And on behalf of, I was coaching a company through it. And they were just never going to get the price per barrel that they wanted. And I said, you're going to have to call it off. You're going to have to walk away. But it's essential that when you walk away from a relationship with your current supplier and move on to the next supplier, that you let your current supplier know you appreciated the relationship, let them know that you'll transition in a way that is least deleterious to them, and let them know that you hope you can continue to stay in touch. Well, to make a long story short, the second supplier came in at a much lower price, but it was no good that the customers of Pizza Hut were getting pizza sauce running off the crust onto their clothes. It was thin pizza sauce. It wasn't good. It wasn't consistent with the sample. So they had to go back to the first pizza sauce company. And to make a long story short, because in ending without escalating and resolving a relationship as an ongoing relationship, even though the deal wasn't ongoing, they were able to rebuild with their prior supplier, do a satisfactory deal, and move on.
Yeah,
Okay?
that's awesome. That was really awesome. I'm just thinking that a number of negotiations that I've been in or helping other people through is not closing the door, keeping it open for future types of connections that you might have. But it also gives time to think. And that was another thing I was going to bring to the table and wanted your thoughts on. Sometimes you just need space to have someone think about what you've just talked about, where it just can't be answered right now.
Well, one of the mistakes people commonly make in negotiations is to go in with an answer at the beginning.
Yeah.
That's why probing is so good, because probing allows you not to supply answers. You know, one of the great
Oh,
tools.
that's
Go ahead.
Fridays. This is a different one with.
Is somebody?
I just muted him.
Okay. Bottom line is that you don't want to come in with answers. You want to come in so that you are in a position where you're gaining information. Information is power in the context of negotiations and resolving differences. And you certainly don't want to make people feel like you're the answer person. If you do, they're going to be put off, and they're going to want to, and you're going to be punch and counter punch. And, you know, one thing I didn't talk much about at the beginning of this today was win-lose equals lose-lose. One of the things that shaped me in the context of my negotiation skills, and, you know, I've been in the world of sports. It's not my primary world, although it's perceived as my primary world. But I was in baseball for a long time as one of my sideline professions. And I watched unions and owners go after each other. And I watched the famous strike of 1993 and 94. And, you know, that's where the two sides just went in, and they had the answers, and they pounded each other. So they both played win-lose. I win, you lose. And what happens when two sides play I win, you lose? Everybody loses.
Yeah.
Lose-lose. So they came crashing down. The industry lost billions of dollars. The resolution of that is a story unto itself. But that happens in life, and you don't want to play win-lose. You want to play a consistent game. They want win-win in the maximizing sense. Make sure you achieve your goals, but don't ignore theirs, and don't pull everything down by trouncing the other side. If you want to go to history, you go to World War I, and you think after the Allies in World War I beat the Germans, what did they do? They took the German economy apart. Now, they did a lot of other things as well. Well, what do some people say that led to? Maybe not in and of itself, but certainly Adolf Hitler was able to use that pulling down the German economy, the win-lose equals lose-lose settlement imposed by the Allies, to rally the Germans along with hateful and horrible other tactics and ideas to lead us into that devastation of World War II. Other questions? And Lauren, you have your list still. Make sure we get through it.
Well, and cut me off, folks, just that Ron has spoken, or Ron, you have spoken about this passion of yours that you're obsessive about around the power of preparation. Can you tell us in this whole sequence, all of the things that we've been talking about in relation to kind of what that means to you, and then why it's so important?
How many of you have flown in an airplane since the pandemic? Hand? Okay. Well, my life used to be flying in an airplane, and it would be flying places to give seminars, whether it be in this country or all over the world. And I would get fascinated with the pilots. I would, because the clients paid, I sat up front, okay? I have a bad back too, and so I had to sit up front. And I would watch the pilots. And what do you see when you look up front before a flight takes off with the pilots? They're going through a checklist, aren't they? And you see them going, check, 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 check. And I'm sitting next to a pilot who happened to be put in the empty seat next to me, who was deadheading to the next flight. And I said, what are you guys doing up there? You know how to fly these planes. He said, we could get right in and fly them instantly, but we want to be prepared, okay? And we each time we have lives in our hands, and that emergency checklist and pilot's checklist is everything to us. And then I think about today, and then I'll tie it into answering your question. I don't know if you remember the flight 1456 that hit some birds in New York and was going to crash, and it went into the Hudson River. Remember that flight? And every passenger lived. They got to walk on the wing in the water, but they all lived. And the captain of that flight was Sully Sullenberger. Great movie about him that only Tom Hanks could play the part. But the bottom line is, Sully Sullenberger talked to Congress about how he pulled this off, how he was able to land this flight with no engines on the Hudson River in this narrow strip. And he talked about his pilot's checklist, his emergency checklist, and how prepared his crew was and how everyone was because they used the checklist. And I traditionally had always prepared, but I said, in the world of negotiation, because it's high pressure, and under pressure, what do? We revert to bad habits, whatever it may be. Why don't we have a checklist? And so we created the preparation checklist, 7 or 8 points of coverage. When you're under pressure, you may go beyond it, you may build other things into it, but it empowered preparation and effectiveness at preparation in a way that pilots demonstrate in what they do. When you're involved in the world of sports, as I am, you know how powerful preparation is in terms of dealing with the other side. So wherever I go, preparation follows me. I used to say to people, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I'll be the best prepared guy in the room. And I think that's really, how you counterbalance other people's power, how you counterbalance other people's brilliance. You just make sure you know that you've done everything within your control in the world of preparation, because preparation is really the only thing you control in life. You don't control the other side. They can walk away from the table. You don't control outside events. The markets could go south tomorrow, even though they've been strong to this point. What do you control? You and how you prepare. Hope that's not too simplistic.
Thank you, Ron. We have 6 minutes, folks. I have a couple more questions, but does anybody want to jump in, take it away from me?
Lauren, go with yours. Let's not deny you the lead.
Only because I've been thinking about this for 6 months, almost every day. Ron, we were nice. We learned tips on dealing with challenging people. We've done all of our research. We're super prepared with a systematic approach for asking what we want. And now we know what we need, but we go for the deal and it breaks down. What is that last piece that's missing?
Well, that's the 4th book. It's called Perfecting Your Pitch, Finding the Words to Succeed in Business and Life. Again, another long title. But let me tell you one thing I want you to remember in addition to the 3 Ps. You can be very well prepared. You can probe properly. You can have your proposal in your mind. But have you ever thought you've done everything right and then gone to a meeting and said something and you go to yourself, oh, wow, why did I say that? Or why didn't I say that? And that's where perfecting your pitch comes in. And that's the 3 Ds, draft, devil's advocate, and deliver. I found that one of the hardest things for me to do as salaries escalated in sports was to ask a team that I loved and my player loved for $10 million. It was tough. $10 million, I'm only a player, And, you know, I could feel myself going in. First of all, to get 10 million, I would have to ask 12 million. Now I'm really feeling ridiculous. You ever have that feeling that you're asking too much? But so I would go in and I'd say, oh, it'll take 12. Look, I understand that's a lot, but it'll take, and, you know, and they hear me and they say, well, he lacks, we can go down. We know we can take it down. So I would script. The perfecting your pitch is really about scripting. I would put it all together. I know what I'd want to say. And rather than just putting it in my mind, I'd put it on paper. That's draft, how I would say it. Then I'd find a devil's advocate. It was usually my partner, Michael Moss, who would rip it up. Or if I were giving a speech or something else, I'd give it to my wife, Kathy, and she'd tell me what she thought of it. And it would change. It would change. It would be better. And then I deliver and I practice delivery. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm in a negotiation with you and I pick up a piece of paper and say, let me tell you what we will do in this negotiation. And I'm reading off it. It just tells you that I've built my confidence by parsing my words, practicing them, having them in my mind. Maybe, Valerie, have to be ready for them to push it another way. And then I might have to call a timeout. But the answer is scripting and perfecting your pitch is another important element. So we have the system of the 3 Ps and the power of NICE, NICE in dealing with difficult people, the preparation checklist in Dare to Prepare, and the scripting and perfecting your pitch in the book of the same name. Make sense? One
Great.
more, Lauren. I like another one you had on that list about
It's
failure.
great. Ron, we can talk about the failures. I won't give the preamble for the failures, but share with us, Ron, about your relationship with failure and any advice you have.
Lots of failure, lots of mistakes I've made in my life, as recently as yesterday. And my relationship with failure is, what can I learn from the mistake I made? You know, people say to me, you wrote 4 books, you must be smart. And I say, I'm not smart. I've just made enough mistakes in my life to have learned lessons which I'd like to teach you so that you're not making those mistakes as well. So the humility to recognize where you failed, that you failed, and to take lessons from it, I think is very important. Lauren, you and I, and I'll close with this because I know we're almost out of time. You and I talked about leadership and leaders, okay? And, you know, who are the best leaders? Not the most powerful leaders, the best leaders. And I see leadership as people willing to engage in lifelong learning. They never stop learning. People who have the humility to recognize that the people who support them are essential to making them effective in what they do. And people who have the humility to recognize that they can learn from their mistakes. Now, there are other elements of leadership that are important, but to me, those are the characteristics of the greatest leaders. Now, you may point to some corporate leaders and say, well, look, he's made $135 billion and he's not humble and he doesn't learn, you know, but, or she doesn't, or whatever. There are people like that. But I think in terms of enduring leadership, those are important traits. So let me close, if I may, by saying one other thing that's really important. And I see Lauren's dad and mom on this particular program, and they're good friends. And I think of them, and I think of what I want to talk about for just one moment. You all are in the business world and in the professional world. You all are striving for success. Part of that success is economic. It should not be dominant by any means, but it's important in the context, particularly if you have families or others that you seek to support in the context of your lives. But it's how you live your life and what you do with your success that's so important. And he's a very complicated character in history. And we could talk a whole hour just about him, or a whole year and talk about him. And that's Winston Churchill, who was an amazing wartime leader. He had, by the way, he had great failings, and we could all learn from the things he failed at. And he learned a few things from them. But he spoke words which I think should inspire all of us to be the best we can be in living life. And those words were, we make a living by what we get. We make a life by what we give. And that really is what I hope drives you in what you do as you move through your lives. And maybe someday when I come back with cane in hand and Rutherford at my side again, I'll hear stories from you that teach me something about living life. Thank you all.
Ron, thank you so much. I see people clapping, and this has been tremendous. TD Bank, thank you for making things like this happen. Ron and Mom and Dad, thanks for making people like Ron in our lives, and now the lives of many, many more. Ron, your time is so precious, just like everybody else's, and we're really grateful.
I just want to know if I should go get my TD Bank coat and put it on at this point, but I won't. I promise.
The TD guy left, so it would have been good back then, but
forget it. You can tell him I did it then, okay?
Thank you. It's so great. And Candor and all the people that support us, Josh and Andy for being part of the magic that we do. John at Castles, thanks for joining. And then all of our participants and the INE team that make the magic happen every day. This has been so cool, Ron. We're so lucky to have your time. Have an amazing end of the week, everybody. And thank you for being part of what we do.
God bless.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Val, for joining. See everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.